right, so let's come back to this. 집중하세요. So for text 2, we'll find the reporting verbs, right? So can you help me find the reporting verbs here? So we did text 1 already last time, so let's come to text 2. So text 2, what do we have? We have proposes, you see that? And then we have advice, and we have say, and we have urge, right? So this is like he or she, the reporter, is trying to summarize what the book is about, right? So we have all these, right? All these verbs, all these reporting verbs, including proposes, advise, say, and then urge, right? So can you tell me whether the reporter here wants to summarize or wants to interpret the book based on what you see here? In a controversial new book, Professor Jane Plant, a chief scientific advisor to the government, proposes a raft meaning a lot of unorthodox treatment. Unorthodox meaning not traditional, new, not traditional, breaking groundbreaking. Treatments for millions of Britons who suffer from anxiety, stress, and depression. So it's about your mental feeling, right? So instead of popping happy pills, so there are pills that will work on your chemistry in your brain. Pills such as Prozac to beat the blues, blue meaning sadness, right? Plant and her co-author, Stevenson, advise sufferers to take steps such as avoiding dairy products that have milk in it, right? Sending fewer text messages, and so on. So the author of this passage wants to summarize or wants to interpret the original source. What do you think? Looking at the verbs here, we have proposes, advise, say, and then urge. We can just only say that the author wants to summarize in the broadest term, right? He wants to summarize in this one, summarize, right? So only summarize, he summarizes broadly, very broadly too. Only the main arguments, only the main points of the text, okay? And then the verb say here, if you look at the verb say, the verb say there doesn't really mean say because it's written down, right? It doesn't mean like say like this. Say can also, when people use the word say, could also be a way of justification. Justification. So justification. Like that. When you are engaged in a conversation, when people say, well, he said that though, it's like said here is used as kind of evidence, not just only reporting speech, right? But say could indicate that that person uses the reported speech as the evidence for his argument. But they say that though, it's like she said that the tips are based on hard scientific evidence. So they justify that their tips are based on scientific evidence. So say doesn't really just mean say to speak, but it means like justify, right? So we finished this one, and today I want to continue with speech representation, and I'll go ahead with the second set of slides, right? So today, last time we talked about direct and indirect speech and features of direct and indirect speech. Now we'll talk about, and also summarize reporting. Now today we'll talk about thought representation and other forms, okay? And if you remember point of view, right? If you remember point of view that we studied like a long time ago, for indirect speech and summarized report, we just only have one point of view, right, in the piece. because that's what the reporter controls, right? The reporter in IS, in indirect speech, and also in summarized reporting, the author controls the substance or the content of the reported speech. So we have only one voice and one point of view is presented. But for direct speech, at least two voices or two point of views are represented, right? That of the original speaker and also that of the reporter. So that's why it's important, okay? Now today we'll look at two more, like free indirect speech, free direct speech, and so on. So we'll add the word free. And we'll also look at thought, okay? Let's look at free first. Free meaning, in this case, free meaning away, right? Free of the quotation marks, or with the quotation marks, but free of the reporting, okay? The reporting frame, right? So there are so many variants of free direct speech, and you can do many things, or you can do many operations, but each operation will involve removing the reporting frame or removing the commas, okay? And, or you can also remove the quotation marks, okay? So if we have, she said, I'll come here tomorrow, that's direct speech, right? Because you see the quotation marks there, and you see the comma, and you see the reporting frame, and you see the words are reported verbatim. But now, you want to remove, you want to make it free. So you remove, you can do many things. So which one should I select? Here, just to get rid of it forever. Here? This one? Shit. Okay, it's gone for good now. So you can remove the quotation marks there. You can remove the reporting frame in the second one. And in the third one, you remove everything, which is the freest form. So there are many ways to do that, but it will involve one or the other, okay, removal of things. Okay, so that's why we call it free. And it might be hard to recognize when it's the freest form because you will not know, because the didactic terms like I or here or tomorrow will not be changed. So it might be hard for you to recognize when you read things, okay? And free indirect speech is the same, similar, but you have the indirect speech, but you remove the reporting frame, you remove everything, right? So based on, she said that she would go there the following day. Here, you remove, she said that, so you have this, right? Or she would be here tomorrow, that's the freest. You don't even, so it's like you summarize, you're summarizing the direct speech and so on. So it might be hard to recognize, okay? Now, thought representation is the same as speech representation, right? So if you start out from direct thought representation, which is the second line, so look at the second line first. He wondered, does she still love me, right? So that's direct thought representation, right? Direct thought representation, you have the quotation marks and everything. And she still loves me doesn't change, right? So, but when you do it free, when you do it in the free version, you remove the reporting frame, he wonder is gone, and sometimes you can also remove the quotation marks, so it's free in that case, in that sense. Or direct thought, still same thing. If you look at the last line first, he wondered if she still loved him, so that's indirect because you see him, right? And you see if, for example, right? So that's indirect. Now, if you want to do it free indirect, you just remove he wonder, for example, and you remove if too. So you have, did she still love him, like that as free indirect thought. So it might be hard to distinguish, but you just maybe there are some things that in the practice that we'll do today will help you recognize. Differences between speech and thought representations. When you do speech representation, that's what you can really hear, right? But for thought representation, what's different is it assumes that you can go into that person's head and knows, like the reporter knows what he or she is thinking about. So that's like kind of fake, artifice, right? So it's kind of fake. Okay? This is what matters when we talk about speech representation. So since we already talked about free, right? Free. So I put the free, FIS, free indirect here, right? And you have this kind of continuum, the scale, from left to right, right? So left-hand side refers to more narrator control. So he can control the substance, he can control the content, the narrator or the reporter can control the substance. So the summarized representation will be there towards that end, right? Whereas the direct speech will be towards the other end where the reporter has no control or little control over what goes into it because it has to be verbatim, right? So free indirect will be somewhere between indirect and direct. So will be there. And then close in terms of the remoteness or closeness to the original, we have this side with less close to the original because whatever you want to say in there, right? Whatever the reporter wants to say in there will be up to the reporter. But on the other side, you have more close to the original. So that's what it means along the continuum or along the scale. So different forms will have different different stylistic effects of representation. For direct thought representation too, for direct thought, you know more detail about the thought, right? Even though it's fake, right? Because you really don't have the access into a person's head. So if it's direct thought, then you have more details about the thought because you have all the quotation marks and everything. But if it's like this one, summarized thought, you know less detail. It's like presumption. Oh, he thought that and whatever, right? That's what he thought and so on, right? So no less detail. So the scale goes down from the top to the bottom with FIT, free indirect thought here and then indirect thought there, okay, and so on. Now, if you want to compare the effect here, we have different ways to present the thought of a person. Like this, she asks herself, what I will do for the rest of my life. You know a lot of details, right? You know that she's asking herself, you know that this is the question, these are all the, maybe presumably, right? The words that she's thinking in her head. But if it's free, what would she do for the rest of her life? Free indirect. So in this case, you don't even know that it's a question. You're not told unless you guess it from the context, right? So for this one, it's like less detail. But even lesser detail would be indirect thought. She asks herself what she would do for the rest of her life and so on, right? And then we have two summarized versions on the bottom there. Like the last one, she thought for a long time. You don't even know any detail at all. You just know that the thinking time is long. That's what you only know, right? So that's like the version with like fewest details possible and so on, okay? So when you analyze text for speech and thought representation, you have to look at how many voices are there. Is there only one voice by the reporter or by the narrator, or how many voices, how many other voices are there in the text? And then look at also the manner of reporting. Like today we'll look at different verbs of reporting because each verb will tell you different kind of perception of the narrator, right, or the reporter. And also adverbs that go along with the verb, like grudgingly, angrily, reliably, and so on. So today we'll do practice on how to recognize different verbs, and because each choice of verb will be like different, will shape different perception of a person. Now, today we'll look at the choice, right? I just mentioned that the choices of the verb matter, right? Now we look at different choices. When you report somebody's speech or thought, you can choose from like a pool of verbs, right? But here, this is how we linguists try to categorize different types of verbs, and these are like the names that we just give to them, right? We have speech reporting verbs, like verbs that just report the speech or thought, like say, tell, ask, inquire, reply, and answer. These verbs are neutral reporting verbs in the sense that when you just use them, there's no like maybe connotations involved in the use of the verbs here. The verbs don't tell us anything about how we, the reader or the hearer, should think about the original speaker. Okay? But when you come to meta-propositional verbs, so propositional like verbs that name the speech. So proposition is like giving the name, right? So metta is above or beyond. So you are naming, in other words, you are naming that speech. Like you call it, he remarks that, you call it whatever as remark. So like meta propositional. So you have the verb of reporting, right? The verb of reporting, VR, and then whatever is reported here, that's your proposition. Okay, like that. So when you use remark, you call this a remark. You call the proposition a remark. When you use explain, you call that proposition an explanation, and so on. When you say agree, you call the proposition agreement, and so on. Okay? So these verbs name the proposition. Okay? We have remark, explain, agree, assent, accept, announce, and so on. Urge, instruct, order, accuse, even. You call that proposition and accusation, and so on, right? Grumble, lament, confess, claim, and swear. So these verbs are marked. These verbs are what we call marked, M-A-R-K, marked. They are marked because they mark the writer or the reporter's interpretation of a source as to how we should interpret the source or the proposition, right? And the purpose. Like North Korea demanded that Panama release its ship. So demand here, right? So you call that's a demand, like a request and so on, right? So it is very, very like connotative, okay? And paralinguistic, para is like on the side or around. So things that include other things beside linguistic. So when you use these verbs to report speech or thought, you include other qualifications or other qualities, not only speech, but other things like whisper, so speak in a low voice, right? For example, right? Not a loud voice. And then murmur, mutter, same thing. Laugh, giggle, sigh, gasp, and groan, same thing, right? You report other things like also manner of speaking when you use these verbs, right? So categorize the interaction, right? So Junsong whisper to Kyungmo, Krista's class is boring, right? So you know that whisper, right? When you do that, so it has to be a secret because maybe they don't want me to hear it, right? So it tells you kind of the perception or the kind of the intention of the reporter that he wants to shape this type of reporting. Now the last one, what we call transcript. Transcript is like the record of a conversation, right? So transcript verbs will, what they do is to relate to other parts of the text. So when you use repeat, echo, add, amend, correct, counter, pause, go on, hesitate, or continue, you have to relate it to other parts, right? When you say he continued, it has to be continued from before, right? So it's related to parts of the text. Or repeat, meaning say the same thing twice. So the same thing must have been said earlier, and so on, right? So these transcript verbs will relate the proposition to other parts of the text. So you have things like, and Al Kyungwan added, you are damn right, and so on, right? So here we have different types of verbs, and each type of verb will have different effects on the words that are reported. So if you compare these three examples, right, we have all the same. Everything is the same except for the reporting verbs. We have minority community leaders, so that's the speaker. And then shouted, remarked, or claimed, and explained, right, as the choice of your verb. And then the same proposition that they have suffered increased level of abuse. So you can see that when you use shouted, it gives a different kind of picture of these guys who say it, right? They shouted, so it's like they're making demand. So it's like maybe more negative, right, to them. And then they just remark in the second one. That's like a more gentle representation of the community leaders, right? Everything is the same except for the reporting verbs. And in the third and the fourth one, they claim that. Claim give you the sense of a little bit sense of demanding, right? They claim, like they assert and demand the recognition of something, right? So claim is different from just explain. So you can see that when you choose different verbs, it matters as to the kind of the perception of the speaker. Okay? So what I want to do next is to look at this, to make this more clear. We look at the next page and we see this picture. And I have different verbs of reporting there. And you see that this might be in the summer, right, at a swimming pool. And let's suppose that this is the mom, and then that is her son, okay? And mom says, take your watch off. So remove your watch, in other words, before you dive in, before you go diving, right? Now, what verbs, or which verbs out of these choices do you want to use for this situation, and why? So which of the reporting verbs here would be possible? Just by looking at this strip of cartoon, which of these verbs would be possible? Do you think that order is possible? She, right? She, the mom. Mom ordered the son to take off the watch. Is that possible or not? Based on just looking at the cartoon, okay? Based on that only. Is it possible or not? Possible, right? Because she is more powerful, presumably, right, than her son. So order would be okay, right? Cajole, is it possible or not? Not really, right? Cajole means to persuade, to sweet talk. To persuade or to sweet talk someone into doing something. So cajole would not be appropriate here, right? She doesn't have to sweet talk someone into her son into taking the watch off. And beg, possible or not? Somewhat possible, right? She can beg her son, right? Please take off, like that, right? Maybe possible. Remind. Very possible, right? Very possible. So she reminded her son to take off, right? Or of taking. Invite, not really, right? So invite, not really. Persuade, maybe. Advise, maybe, right? So good, right? Advise, good. Insist, perhaps, okay, right? Maybe this is the second time that she has said it, right? So she insisted that, right? So maybe. So insist, when you say insist, it usually has to be like the second time or the third time, right? Because insist involves like saying the same thing twice or more. Request, maybe okay, right? Permit, no, not in this case, right? She doesn't have to allow her son to do that, right? Recommend, yes, right? Recommend is like advice, and so in that case, suggest is the same thing. So she suggests that her son take off the watch. Warning or warn? Warn, okay, right? She warns her son. Compel, no. Because compel means to force someone powerfully, to powerfully force someone, no. Intent, no. Approve, I don't think so. Threaten, not likely, right? Not likely. Scold, no. Scold means to criticize. Scold is to criticize. To censure, to reprimand, to reproach, that kind of thing. Criticize, censure, reprimand, reproach, that kind of thing. So not appropriate in this case, okay? To find fault with her son, in other words. No. So, but that's just by looking at the strip of cartoon, right? But in real life, how might the boy in the picture be able to decide exactly what his mom means in real life? Or if you were the boy, how would you know that your mom suggests or your mom just only advise or insist or requested and so on? How would you know? Or order, how would you know? Well, we just need to listen, right? Listen to the tone of her voice, for example, right? So listen to the tone of the voice in real life. So we have in real life, So we have tone of the voice, and maybe facial expression, and body language, right? So tone of the voice, facial expressions, and body language will tell you which verbs would be appropriate, right? But given that most of the time, when we hear a report of speech or thought, right, we never know the original, right, the original situation. So that's why you have to be careful about the author's or the reporter's intention in selecting which of these verbs, right? Because we are not in the original situation. So we have to be careful that each choice will shape our perception, right? Can you turn some of these verbs into indirect speech, right? So order, what do you say? She ordered him to take off his watch, for example, right? Easy. So she, right, ordered him to take off the watch, and so on, right? So that's the same for warn or maybe persuade, like that, right? So she persuaded him to take off the watch, and so on, right? To take off the watch, and so on. Or same thing with advice and requested and begged and so on, right? And reminded and so on, right? Or when it comes to suggest, right? You can use the that clause, right? She suggested that the son take off the watch, right? So we can have she suggested that the son take off the watch, right? Like that. We usually have no S in the subordinate clause when it's a verb of suggesting, recommending, or requesting, and so on, right? Because it's, I think, what people call subjunctive, something like that, without the S, okay? But you can have should take off the watch, and so on, okay? So in absence of the tone of the voice, in absence of the facial expressions and so on, we never know what the original situation might be. So we have to look at these choices and just take them by the grain of salt, right? By the pin of salt. So the next thing that I want to do is to look at this news piece. And first, so it's a news piece that reports Blair's reaction to public opinions about the war in Iraq in 2003. Okay? Now, the first thing that I would like you to do is have you circle all the verbs of reporting. Okay? So circle all the verbs of reporting and put them in the corresponding columns. So Blair uses what verb? Blair is represented through which reporting verb? And then there are three main groups of people in this news piece, including Blair, the crowd, meaning the people who are listening, and also the chair, right? So can you circle first the verb of reporting and put those verbs in the columns to which the speaker, okay, is saying something, okay? So, like the first one, Tony Blair was heckled today, right? Heckled, to heckle someone is like to ask him like lots of difficult questions, lots of annoying questions. So like maybe interviewers or something like that, that ask like pop stars questions. So we can say that the interviewers heckle the pop star with questions, okay? So heckle, so that's one verb. So that's Blair, right? So you can put it there. So Blair, he was heckled, right, with questions, and so on. So what about other verbs that represent speech? Other words, verbal process. Like here we have he refused to express. That's another one, right? So verb of reporting, refuse to express. That's another one, right? So you can put that under there, under Blair. So we have refuse to express, like that. Okay? So I have you maybe work on this for about 4 minutes, and we'll look at all the choices. Okay? Okay, what other verbs of saying or reporting that you see here? Verbal processes. We have insist, right? You see insist. And who might be doing the insisting? Blair, right? Mr. Blair. So we have insisted here. Correct? And then what else do we have? There were cries of consternation. We don't have verb of reporting there, right? Cries of consternation. Consternation is like confusion or maybe dismay, like fear, right? So we don't have that. What else? Prime Minister rejected, right? Rejected is another one. And who might be rejected? Who might be doing the rejection? The former Prime Minister, right? So we have Blair here, rejected. And what else? We have in the third paragraph, let's go to the third paragraph, okay, because we are done with the second. The third paragraph, we have Chairman Sir John Chilcot had to tell audience member. So we have had to tell here, right, under the chair column here, right? To be quiet during Mr. Blair's closing comments, in which he insisted he stood by his actions in the run-up to the 2003 war, in which he insisted he stood by. In other words, he doesn't change his position. So insist, who might be doing the insisting? Blair. So we have insist here twice, right? To insist. And then what else? In the fourth paragraph, we have it was divisive, and I'm sorry about that. He conceded, but continue. So we have that. Conceded and continue. Right? Concede, what does it mean? It means to admit, right? To admit. To accept, to admit. It was divisive, meaning not everybody would agree. And I'm sorry about that. He conceded, but continue and so on, right? So we're done with that paragraph. Let's look at the next one. Asked if he had any regrets at all, he replied. So we have replied. He, in this case, refers to Blair, okay? So you put it in the corresponding column. So he replied, he meaning Blair. So he replied, responsibility, but not a regret. So he didn't regret a thing going into Afghanistan and Iraq. Prompting the audience to erupt and cry. So we have the audience now, right? Prompting the audience. Who would be doing the crying and erupting? So the audience. We have erupt plus cry, like that there. What? No regrets? Come on, right? So the audience is saying that, right? Now the last one. When the cameras cut off and Mr. Blair ready to leave, he was booed, right? So that's yayuhada, right? And so booed. So that's one. So that's Blair, right? So we have he was booed. And one audience member shouted, "You are a liar." So we have the crowd or the audience shouted. And then before another chime in, a murderer. So chime in belonging to the crowd like that, right? Or the audience. So chime in is like to interrupt. So to interrupt and join. Right? To interrupt and join. So now we just do the labeling. Now, what do you see in this kind of table here? What kind of interpretation we can make about Mr. Blair, right? So out of these verbs under Blair, which one is neutral? Which of these verbs is neutral, meaning it doesn't suggest any connotation? Maybe reply, only reply, right? Only reply here is neutral. Where's my reply? Here. So only reply is neutral, right? Only reply is neutral. But other verbs are connotative, right? And so it's clear that the writer of this piece or the reporter of this piece is seeking to shape your interpretation, the reader's interpretation of Mr. Blair and other people, okay? And how we are to interpret Mr. Blair's position, right? So it's clear by the choices here because only reply is neutral. So let's look at other verbs. So Blair's comments are represented mostly through what we call meta-propositional. Remember? Meta-propositional verbs like refuse. You see, refuse to express. And what else? We have resist, we have reject, we have concede, and so on, right? So these are meta-propositional verbs. And they mark the author's interpretation of Mr. Blair, right? So Mr. Blair then is represented as a person who is very defensive, right? Defensive, like rejected. So he rejects something. He conceded something. He admits that it's true, right? Concede means to admit that it's true. So Mr. Blair is very defensive here, right? Like he refused to express regret. He refused to, it means that he should do, right? He refused to express, meaning he should do, right? So the writer is telling us this is how we should interpret Blair, and so on, right? And what else do we have? What about insist? Insist. Insist conveys the sense that you have to do things so many times, right? You have to keep saying the same thing so many times. So there might be some kind of doubt, there might be some kind of question, so you have to insist, right? So insist marks the speaker as not being listened to, right? Not being listened to. Suggests that whatever he or she says might be ignored earlier, so he has to do it twice. So all of these verbs, only replied is neutral. Other verbs are connotative and negatively connotative on the speaker, right? And concede, same thing, right? Concede means to admit that it's true, right? So that's Blair. So he's represented negatively through the choices here. What about the crowd or the audience? We have erupt and cry. We have they shout, and we have chime in, right? So these are negative, right? Negative, not to themselves, but towards Blair, right? So we can see that the reporter is painting the picture of the crowd or the audience not accepting Blair's reaction. So again, Blair is represented negatively through the crowd and so on, through the audience. And the chair has only one verb, had to tell, right? So in this case, it's neutral, right? Had to tell, but with the modal verb, had to, right? So we'll talk about modal verb later on. But so in this case, we see that Blair is represented negatively through the reporting verbs of himself, reporting him, and also through the verb of the crowd reacting to Blair's reaction and so on. So that's how we do it in this case, okay? So we have time for the last one. For the last one, it's the same kind of thing, but in this case, it's Gordon Brown rather than Blair, okay? So, so we'll have the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, talking about the letter to a soldier's family who got killed in the war, and we'll see how he explained the situation. So I'll have you do the same. Since this piece focuses on Brown, so we have only one major character here, which is Brown. So can you identify all the verbs of reporting that the reporter uses to represent Brown by first circling the verbs here, and then we'll look at the choice of verbs that the author uses or the reporter uses, okay? So identify all the verbs of reporting here, And since this piece focuses on Brown, there's only one person, one major character, which is Brown. So we don't have to do that three column table like we did before. So I'll walk around and help you. In the previous one, I skipped one. In this case, we have asked if they had any regrets, okay? So in this case, we can include it in Blair, as if. So that's the indirect speech, right? As if. So that one is neutral. So only 2 out of the rest are neutral, okay? But it's interesting, like any at all suggests that he should, right? Suggests that he should. Like, don't you have any regrets at all, right? And so on. Right? Suggest that you should. So for this one, what do we have? Verbal reporting. So we have this, spoke, right? We have spoke as the first one. We have maybe suggest as the second one, right? Suggest. And then apologize, right? And then next one we have reiterate. Reiterate means to repeat, right? Re is again, iterate is to repeat. Make remarks here is the material process. So even though it means like speaking, but it's the material process, so we won't do that. What else do we have? Defend, and we have explain, and we have revealed. Right? So in a lot of these we have summarized version, like he was forced to defend his treatment of the war dead, right? So in this case, it's the summarized version, not direct or indirect, it's the summarized version, right? So you can see his treatment of the wall. In this case, you can unpack it because it's a normalized thing. So you can, to defend that, to defend if, and so on, right? So you can unpack it as to what we studied before. So all these verbs, we already label. So what kind of personality does the reporter give to Brown here? What kind of personality? If you look at the choice of verbs here, we have spoke of, we have suggest, apologize, reiterate, explain, defend, and review. Do you think that he is like a powerful person or not based on these verbs? He's not powerful, right? So he's not a powerful prime minister, right? So following the first one, following spoke, which is like neutral. So spoke, the first one is neutral. Following that, we have suggest. Suggest, the second paragraph, right? Suggest is a meta-propositional verb, right? And it appears to have a lack of conviction, meaning when you suggest something, there's a lack of conviction. Conviction is belief, right? So it's not 100% sure. Let's say, I suggest that it might rain. I suggest that it might rain. The weather forecast suggests rain. Suggest meaning not full conviction, not like 100% belief, certainty. So it's lack of conviction for that one. So the prime minister here is not strong. So he just suggests, make a suggestion. And then in the third one, what do we have? Apologize. So apologize means to show, right? To show that he's regrets. He's made something wrong. He did something wrong. So in this case, he's not powerful again. Okay? He's really a passivated person, right? Passivated agent and defensive, right? He's on the defensive side. And what do we have next? Reiterate. It means to repeat, right? So his earlier words might be ignored. So in other words, so he's not strong. He's not powerful. What else do we have? Defend and try to explain, right? So defend, again, defend meaning you have to protect yourself, right? So defend and try to explain both imply that he's not capable of explaining or it's not likely that he has any kind of explanation. So he's on the defensive side again, right? And the last one, review. Review. Review, review implies that something is hidden before, right? Something is hidden before. So let's say maybe if you compare review like Kyuho reviewed, Aseneki broke his heart. Or review to Krista. So in this case, it used to be a secret. Now he revealed it. And everybody learned about it, right? Or Gyuho. Announce. Announce is better, right? Announce that Aseneki broke his heart. So not a snake, okay? But Seneki, like a freshman. So announce shows the powerful position of the speaker, right? So he announced, so he doesn't care, right? He's strong. But if it's review, it used to be a secret. Now everybody learned about it, right? Not through me, but through him. Through him. So again, review more like passive agent, right? And also give the sense of something was hidden, something was a secret before. So all in all, what do we have to say about Brown, or what the reporter have to say about Brown? So he is not he's not actually a powerful prime minister here, and he's on the defensive side, and he never initiates any of his speech himself. He just suggests, review, or he reiterates and he apologizes, right? So he has to respond to other people's reactions rather than initiate something of his own. So all in all, we have a negative representation of this guy through all the verbs here. Okay? So today we talked about choices of verbs, and we say that choices are meaningful. And on Monday, next Monday, we'll come back and look at this one more time. And don't forget that the paper is due next Monday too. Okay?